When it comes to the hiring process, knowing how to interview someone is perhaps one of the most integral parts of that journey. And so knowing how to conduct that interview is extremely important in being able to find the right person for the job. Structured interviews are widely used as they are seen as a more valid and accurate way to assess a candidate. And so firstly, we should try to follow a structured interview form. Structured interviews focus on set questions with predetermined answers. And so following this format also allows us to reduce any bias or discrimination that a candidate could perceive. Our jobs are the most central things to our lives, and so interviews that can determine our future can be nerve-wracking for us. That is why, as an interviewer, it is best to begin by putting the candidate at ease. The interviewer should start by asking them general questions like about how they got to the interview, traffic, the weather, and other things. It is best to steer away from topics such as politics or anything controversial. Starting with questions like these will allow for the candidate to feel more comfortable and put their guard down, allowing for a better interview for both the candidate and the interviewer. Once the candidate is at ease, we should follow up with job-related questions. In an interview environment, there are various idiosyncrasies that occur that can lead to bias and discrimination. These can occur when we have differing ideas of an ideal candidate, when we do not access candidates multidimensionally, and when we as interviewers prefer candidates similar to ourselves. This can lead to significant problems for our company if candidates feel as though they were treated differently or unfairly. Bias in general can lead to the recruitment of a candidate that does not fit the organization. The best way to avoid this is by sitting down with those involved in the recruitment process and understand all aspects that are needed for the job. There should be a clear outline of the criteria needed that everyone is in agreement with. This includes the knowledge, skill, and ability necessary for the position, as well as the tasks and activities the winning candidate would need to carry out. They should also make sure that there are some points that help them understand if the applicant would fit with the organizational culture. Once the selection criteria is set, we would move on to creating an interview guide. An interview guide should include a list of sample questions that the interviewer can use that meets all the points addressed in the selection criteria. This allows for the avoidance of irrelevant questions being asked and interviewer bias showing. Additionally, another way to reduce bias and prevent discrimination is conduct a panel interview. This would use multiple interviews that would present for each interview with a candidate. This allows for better interview judgments and more diverse perspectives. When writing questions for the interview guide, it would be best to follow the OSAE format of writing questions. These questions look at asking candidates about their different skills and make them put into the context of a real-life situation for us to get a better understanding of how they work. It also helps to avoid falling to the rut of asking basic questions that have obvious answers that any candidate can answer. Questions like, are you self-motivated, or do you take initiative? Key characteristics for any job, but it is likely a candidate's answer to these would not tell us much about them. Instead, we should write OSAE questions that ask for an obstacle or situation, the actions the candidates took, and the end results. These questions should hit a few major points to get a well-rounded perspective of the candidate. They should be asked in the context of the skills that the client may need for the job, their strengths and their weaknesses, and lastly, career fit questions that will help the interviewer understand the work environment that the candidate prefers and if it is similar to our firm. Once the candidate has answered these questions, it is always best to ask follow-up questions or get them to elaborate to get a better understanding of the situation and their actual involvement in it. It is best to end career-related questions by asking the client about their goals. It is important to specify that you are asking about their career or professional goals to avoid irrelevant answers. It is best to follow up the answer with a follow-up question on steps that they have taken to achieve this goal. Lastly, once all the necessary data has been collected, we can ask if the candidate has any questions. Inter-rater reliability is a major part of the candidate selection process to ensure that the interviewers are hiring the correct candidates who are suitable and qualified for the role. In a vastly growing society, interviewers have idiosyncratic judgments, which is a process that undermines organizational effectiveness. Research conducted in Graves and Karen 1996 shows insight into interviewers' decision-making process and how they might vary. The causes of idiosyncrasy in interviews are the opinions of the ideal candidate, in which some interviewers may consider hands-on experience to be more important, rather than theoretical experience or vice versa. Information processing skills of the interviewer, where interviewers have trouble recalling information that was previously attained, which results in incorrect decision-making skills of an ideal candidate. Similarity bias, which influences interviewers to see applicants similar to themselves, and interviewers' behavior where social competence is deficient, resulting in a failure to display positive nonverbal behavior such as smiling, eye contact, or nodding. To improve all the flaws in decision-making, a step-by-step plan needs to be implemented into the workspace. First is to develop a selection criteria. This is where the skills, knowledge, characteristics, and abilities needed in order to perform will be determined by the organization. This is to ensure that we know exactly what we are looking for and leave space for interviewers to have specific idiosyncrasies. In a group meeting, managers and interviewers should convene and identify activities and key tasks to perform the job, so people who conduct it know what to look out for. Second would be to determine how criteria will be assessed. This step includes the determination of which criteria will be assessed and which will be measured through the use of alternative techniques, should they fall out of the implemented criteria. This is to avoid interviewers assessing things they should not be, and if they are to, the alternative technique could be used. The third and fourth step is to create interview guides and train the interviewers to use them. The guide will be the base which interviewers should follow. This leads to a clear idea of how predictable and unpredictable applicants could be considered. If the interviewer has been trained to expect the unexpected, it will result in consistently qualified candidates. The interviewers should also conduct role play with fellow interviewers to ensure that the initial and follow-up questions are adequately worded. This helps with comfort in face-to-face interviews and puts peace of mind on interviewers to assess the applicant rather than being concerned about what to say or do next. The final step is to monitor the effectiveness of each interview. This will help rapidly modernize the interviewing process, as it will keep the organization up to date with how candidates are changing over time and what can be improved in order to ensure we are still accepting qualified candidates. This may mean a change in interviewers should effectiveness be lower than others. Those who are successful in hiring ideal applicants get rewarded. The predictivist and constructivist approaches are both commonly used in the interview process by nearly all organizations. However, the most common approach to this is the predictivist perspective. The focal point of this approach is that making decisions about the candidate who has applied for a job, along with comparisons with fellow candidates and past performance on any previous job. The candidate is also assessed on present traits such as personality and social skills during the process. The constructivist perspective is quite the opposite. It focuses more on what the candidate decides or feels during the selection process, rather than what job they have done in the past or how well they had performed. The constructivist perspective recognizes that not only does an organization make decisions, but the candidates do as well. An example of this would be the option to accept the offer or not by the candidate. From this perspective, the selection process would be more social or psychological based interaction, creating an implicit contract between the employer and the employee. This indicates expectations from the employer such as work ethics and commitment, the expectations of an employee such as career progression, competitive wages, and working conditions. Essentially, this perspective highlights that skills are not the bottom line, and so it implies that the work ethic itself may actually play a greater role than any specific set of skills. And so this approach may be seen as incredibly effective, especially today, when many jobs lack clear definition within a company. And so this approach in the interviewing process assumes that an employee who fits into the company may change jobs within that organization. And so by forming a relationship with the company and to hire someone based on a series of social interactions, the employee can be guaranteed to adjust to the company culture and indicates their ability to adapt socially. Because within any case, an employee is not merely taking a job, but they are joining a company. During the interview process, the manager needs to balance both approaches. The reason behind this is that each approach serves different purposes that are collectively beneficial to the selection process. While the predictivist approach ensures that the potential candidate's capability to fulfill the role requirements, the constructivist approach shows how well both parties would fit into each other's expectations and cultures. Using the predictivist approach as a baseline to ensure that at least the most basic requirements of the job is ascertained, while using the constructivist approach to ensure that those skills are complemented by the individual's ability to adapt to the culture of the workplace. Balancing these roles does not necessarily always have to be 50-50. More methodical and analytical roles, such as a financial analyst or an accountant, where skills are the primary concern, the interviewer might consider taking more of a predictivist approach. However, when it comes to roles that are less loosely defined, such as marketing, that require a great deal of creativity, a constructivist approach might be more appropriate. Every interviewer's needs will be different. And so it is important for the interviewer to understand what it is that they actually need. Whether it is more important for the company to find someone that is adaptable to the work culture, or whether skills are the primary concern. Knowing this will help you decide which approach to take a preference for.